This is just unbelievable, because what started as a simple hospital update from Shohei Ohtani quickly turned into a nationwide wave of attention that no one inside the Dodgers organization saw coming, not because of a game-winning performance or a shocking trade, but because of something far more personal. Something that instantly blurred the line between superstar athlete and family man in a way that captured the entire baseball world's attention within minutes. It began with a photo. A single image. The first public glimpse of Ohtani's second child. At first, nobody fully understood why this moment was different from other celebrity announcements. But the second the image surfaced, everything changed. Social media exploded instantly. Fans reacted not just with curiosity, but with emotional excitement. The response wasn't about baseball stats or performance metrics. It was about something far more universal. The reaction was simple, instinctive, and immediate. Cuteness. But it wasn't just that. It was the way the moment felt. Because in the photo, Ohtani wasn't the story alone. There was something else that immediately caught attention inside the baseball community. Reports began circulating that Ohtani's eldest child was also present at the hospital during the visit. And that detail alone shifted the entire narrative from a simple birth announcement into something far more emotionally layered. For the first time, fans were seeing something they had never associated with Shohei Ohtani in this way before. Not just the MVP. Not just the two-way superstar. But a father with two children, beginning to build a life that exists outside of stadium lights, contract negotiations, and highlight reels. And the reaction was instant. The phrase that began circulating everywhere was surprisingly simple. They look like twins. Not literally, but emotionally. The resemblance, the framing, the warmth of the moment all created a visual impression that made people feel like they were witnessing something rare, something intimate, something not usually seen from one of the most private athletes in the sport. Inside the Dodgers organization, the reaction was just as immediate. Players began sharing the image in group chats again and again, each time reacting with the same disbelief and admiration. Some players reportedly paused for several seconds just looking at the photo without saying anything. Others immediately smiled and started talking about it out loud, as if trying to process the emotional impact in real time. One veteran player reportedly said it didn't even feel like a baseball moment anymore. It felt like something bigger, something that had nothing to do with competition and everything to do with life itself. And that is when another detail emerged that changed everything again. The gender of the baby. Once that information was confirmed and circulated among team sources, the reaction shifted from curiosity to celebration. The Dodgers clubhouse, usually defined by structure and routine, suddenly became filled with laughter, conversations, and spontaneous reactions that had nothing to do with baseball preparation. Players were smiling in hallways. Coaches were discussing the moment between drills. Staff members were reacting like longtime family friends. Because at that point, the story was no longer just about Ohtani. It was about shared happiness. A moment that belonged to everyone around him. But while the emotional wave continued building inside the organization, something unexpected happened that shifted the tone of the entire story again. An emergency announcement. It came from within the Dodgers organization, and it immediately created confusion across media circles. According to early reports, Dodgers general manager and manager Dave Roberts made a sudden statement that caught even internal staff off guard. The message was short, direct, and unexpected. Ohtani has been out of the hospital due to unexpected circumstances. That single line triggered immediate speculation. What did it mean? Was there a medical concern? Was there a scheduling change? Was something urgent happening behind the scenes that fans didn't know about? Inside the media world, questions multiplied instantly. But inside the organization, the tone was more controlled. There was no panic, but there was urgency. The kind of urgency that comes not from crisis, but from sensitivity around a personal situation involving one of the most high-profile athletes in the world. And that is where the story became even more complicated. Because while fans and media tried to interpret the meaning of the announcement, those closer to the situation understood that not everything involving Ohtani is meant to be viewed through the lens of baseball reporting. Some moments exist outside the game entirely. Still, the timing of the announcement only intensified public curiosity. At the same time, the original photo continued spreading across platforms, gaining more reactions by the minute. People weren't analyzing it like sports news. They were reacting to it like a cultural moment. The kind of image that transcends teams, leagues, and even sports itself. And inside the Dodgers clubhouse, the impact was still growing. Players who had already seen the photo were going back to it again. Those who hadn't seen it yet were asking to view it for the first time. Conversations kept restarting, each time with the same emotional tone. Surprise. Joy. Admiration. But beneath all of it, there was something deeper developing. A shift in how people viewed Ohtani himself. For years, he has been seen through the lens of performance. The rare two-way superstar. The player who challenges baseball's traditional limits. The athlete who seems to operate on a level of discipline and focus that is difficult to compare with anyone else. But this moment added another layer. A human layer. A family layer. A reminder that behind every highlight is a life that continues beyond the field. And that realization quietly changed the atmosphere inside the organization. Even players who had competed against him for years before becoming teammates admitted that seeing this side of him made him feel more real, more grounded, more relatable in a way that statistics could never capture. Meanwhile, the mystery around the unexpected circumstances announcement continued to grow. Reporters pressed for clarification, but details remained limited. And that only added to the speculation. In moments like this, silence often becomes louder than explanation. Every lack of detail creates room for interpretation, and in the modern media landscape, interpretation spreads faster than confirmation. But inside the organization, the focus remained steady. The priority wasn't public reaction. It was the moment itself. Because for Ohtani, this was not about headlines. It was not about viral images or trending discussions. It was about family. And those closest to the situation understood that clearly. Still, one question continued circulating everywhere. Why was Ohtani out of the hospital under unexpected circumstances? Was it related to travel? Was it related to timing? Was it simply a routine change that became amplified due to public attention? No one outside the organization had a clear answer yet. And that uncertainty kept the story alive at an even higher level. Back inside the clubhouse, players eventually shifted from reacting to the news to reflecting on it. The conversation slowly moved from excitement to appreciation. Several veterans reportedly talked about how moments like this are bigger than baseball itself. That careers come and go, seasons begin and end, but family moments remain constant. The younger players listened quietly. And for a rare moment, the usual noise of competition faded into something more reflective. But just when it seemed like the story had reached its emotional peak, another small detail began circulating quietly through team sources. Something about Ohtani's eldest child. Something that had not been fully noticed in the initial reaction. And once that detail spread, it created a completely new wave of conversation that shifted the entire narrative again. It wasn't just a family photo anymore. It felt like a moment that captured a transition, something deeper happening in real time inside Ohtani's life that fans were only beginning to understand. And that's when the conversation shifted again, this time more intensely than before, because someone finally said it out loud in the clubhouse. They really look like siblings who grew up side by side already. That sentence spread immediately, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt strangely accurate to everyone who had seen the image. The resemblance in the energy between the two children, the way the older one appeared so naturally close to the newborn, created a visual impression that felt unusually strong. It wasn't about physical similarity alone anymore. It was about presence. Connection. The feeling that this wasn't just a new baby being introduced to the world, but a family moment already forming its own identity. And that emotional shift inside the clubhouse mattered more than anyone expected. Because suddenly, players weren't just reacting like fans. They were reacting like people who understood what moments like this mean in real life. The jokes disappeared for a moment. The laughter softened. Even the earlier excitement about gifts and celebrations began to evolve into something more thoughtful. One veteran player reportedly said that moments like this remind you that baseball is just what they do, not who they are. That comment lingered in the air longer than expected, because it quietly grounded the entire conversation. But outside the clubhouse, the situation was still building pressure. The unexpected circumstances announcement that had been made earlier by Dodgers leadership continued to circulate across media platforms, now detached from its original context and interpreted in multiple ways. Some reports suggested it was simply procedural timing related to hospital discharge protocols. Others speculated it was tied to privacy measures being enforced more strictly due to Ohtani's global attention. And some discussions even went further, attempting to connect it to scheduling adjustments for team-related obligations. But inside the organization, the tone remained controlled and calm. There was no sense of emergency, no sense of panic. Instead, there was a quiet understanding that when someone like Ohtani experiences a personal milestone, the logistics around him often become more complicated simply because of the level of attention involved. And that attention was now at a global scale. The photo of the second child continued spreading across every platform imaginable. Not because it was staged or promoted, but because it struck a universal emotional response. People weren't analyzing it like sports content anymore. They were reacting to it like a human story. The kind of image that gets shared not because it is news, but because it makes people feel something. And that feeling was consistency across reactions. Warmth. In the Dodgers clubhouse, the second wave of discussion began focusing on something slightly different now. Not just the baby, not just the eldest child, but the idea of Ohtani managing this new phase of life while still being one of the most physically demanding athletes in professional sports. That contrast became a major talking point. How does someone balance this level of performance pressure with such a significant personal life shift? One player reportedly joked that Ohtani probably treats fatherhood the same way he treats pitching preparation, with complete discipline and structure. That comment made people laugh again, but it also reflected something deeper about how teammates perceive him. To them, Ohtani is not someone who separates life into chaotic parts. He organizes everything. Even the most personal moments seem to be handled with the same quiet focus he brings to the field. And that perception only strengthened the mystery surrounding him. Meanwhile, Dave Roberts found himself once again at the center of questions from reporters, because the earlier Shohei's book comment was still echoing through media circles, and now the new developments were adding even more layers to it. When asked again about the situation, Roberts didn't change his tone. If anything, he became even more reflective. He acknowledged that what people are seeing now is only a small part of a much longer journey, and that moments like this tend to reveal more about a person than any game ever could. He was careful, though, not to over-explain. And that restraint made his words even more intriguing. Because when Roberts spoke about Ohtani, it never felt like surface-level praise. It felt like observation. Like someone who has watched a story unfold chapter by chapter and is now watching a new section begin without fully knowing where it leads. Inside the clubhouse, the focus eventually returned to the gifts again, but in a more structured way this time. Plans were no longer just casual ideas. They were becoming coordinated efforts. Players began discussing timelines, responsibilities, and how to make sure the gesture felt appropriate without crossing into unnecessary attention. It wasn't about extravagance. It was about sincerity. And that distinction mattered. Because everyone understood that Ohtani is not someone who seeks attention for personal milestones. If anything, he avoids it. That's why the organization as a whole was careful about how they responded publicly while still expressing genuine happiness internally. But even as things seemed to stabilize, one final detail began emerging from within the organization that shifted the entire tone of the story again. Something about the hospital moment that had not been fully understood yet. Something about the timing of the eldest child's appearance. And something that suggested the entire sequence of events might not have been as simple as everyone initially assumed.